Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with The Bad Seed, Chapter 10. She slept after a long time, and when she did, she became involved in a terrifying dream. There was a woman with a hatchet in her hand who moved up from the road. She paused at the farmhouse and searched it. When she did not find what she was looking for, she went to the barn, pulling the hatchet from behind her for concealment, and called out, sweet, patient voice, "Christine! Where are you, Christine? Don't be afraid of me. Do you think your mother would harm you?" But Christine, hidden in the tall grass, would not answer. When she looked up again, the barn was full of windows, and each window framed the face of one of her mother's victims. There was one window vacant, and she heard her mother saying, Christine, take your place with the others." And the others at the windows chanted in chorus, "You'll never find Christine. Her present identity is well concealed." The faceless woman said, "I'll find her no matter where she is. I'm the incomparable Bessie Danker. I'm the one whose master plan works so well." Then plainly she saw her mother's placid, conventional face, and trembling, she pressed herself closer to the earth, while the people at the windows returned to one another in concern and said, "The incomparable Bessie Danker wants Christine this time. Christine, take your place with the others. Has anybody seen Christine? Christine is the one who's escaped." Mrs. Penmark, turning nervously on her pillow, struggled upward to reality, her wet hands pressed together. She sat up in bed and smoothed out her pillow. She lay, trembling for a time, her teeth chattering in an irregular rhythm, as though she were cold. She tried to sleep again, and at length she did. When she woke, it was morning. It was raining, and with wind through the rain over the tops of the trees and through the patterns of their tossing branches. The trees in the park looked drenched and desolate as they bent before the wind, shivered and righted themselves once more. The gutters were overflowing, and water ran down the courtyard with a quarrelsome sound so close to speech that you felt, if you listened more attentively, you could surely know its meaning. She closed her windows and mopped where the rain had blown into the house. Then going to the kitchen to fix breakfast for her child, she saw Leroy, wrapped in an old plastic raincoat, his wet shoes squashing as she walked, carrying out ashes from the basement. She stood irresolutely beside her window, as though she had already forgotten her purpose, hearing the banging of the cans that Leroy wrapped in, sat them in an alley for the garbage man to pick up at 9. He came back to the courtyard and bent down to clear flooded leaf-stopped drain. Though she could not bear his mumbling voice, she could almost know the words he said by the petulant motion of his lips. When Rhoda had eaten her breakfast, had folded her napkin and put it away in the side drawer, she asked permission to visit Mrs. Forsythe. The old lady, she said, had promised to teach her to crochet, and now that it was raining, she must stay inside in any event. She thought it would be a good time for her first lesson. Mrs. Penmark frowned in indecision. Now that she knew the horror of Rhoda's inheritance, could chart with a reasonable certainty what her career would be, she would wonder if she were morally justified letting her be alone with anyone. Perhaps she could no longer let her out of her sight. She had even warned others of her criminality, but knowing how difficult these hysterical things were of accomplishment, she could look down helplessly and renew her intention of making no decision until her husband returned. She said, "If you let go, you must promise not to do anything to Mrs. Forsythe. Do you understand me?" "No, Mother, I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, Rhoda, let's not have any more trauma acting. We understand each other very well. Let's be natural with each other from now on. You know quite well what I'm talking about." Rhoda giggled, nodded her head, and said as a matter of fact, "I know what you mean, but I won't do anything to her." And then pressing her hands together, rolling her eyes roguishly, she said, "Aunt Jessie hasn't got anything I want." So she's aware that she's a murderer. All right. When her child had gone, and her routine tasks of the morning were partly done, the implication that had lain so strong in Mrs. Penmark's mind, since she knew who she was, broke thoroughly strong. She paused while polishing her rosewood console table and turning away frowning. A moment later, she could not remember what brought her bedroom in the first place. She had put her camos cloth and stood in confusion beside her bed, her hands shaking, making futile gestures in the air. The discovery of her true identity had clarified much once so seeming in her child. She could now see that Rhoda was not responsible for the things she'd done. She, not Rhoda, was the guilty one, for it was she who had passed on the inheritance from Bessie's anger to the little girl, the inheritance that lain down for a generation but had bloomed once more to destroy. Knowing that these things, how she could blame her child, how to hold her accountable. The more her poor, distraught mind dwelled on these matters, the plainer her guilt seemed to her, and she kept saying to herself, I'm so ashamed, I'm so ashamed. She sat down at length, despair flooding her mind. Then, in a final effort to ease herself from guilty knowledge she knew would destroy her, she wondered if the circumstances of grandmother and grandchild being alike in their criminality was any more than coincidence, an accidental fact like any other, one with no implications behind it. Perhaps it was true taking her guilt for granted. She assumed too much. Perhaps she was the inevitable link between Bessie Denker and her child, was blameless. After all, she felt that if anybody knew these matters, Reginald Tasker would know, but after a long time she debated with herself the wisdom of calling him, fearing he would not consider her question an abstract one. She hoped that he would connect it quickly with the problems she faced. Lest anyone know the secret she was determined to guard for anyone. She came to the conclusion that he would probably not suspect the true purpose behind her question. He knew a little of the reality that faced her, but not enough. She alone knew all the parts of the puzzle. The death of the old lady in Baltimore, the death of the Dago boy at the picnic, the horror of the child's inheritance. Those parts which, like an elementary jigsaw puzzle, a puzzle with less necessary pieces than the ones Rhoda loved to assemble, likely revealed the whole. She walked about in perturbation, unable to make up her mind, and at last Reginald solved the problem for her. At noon he telephoned to ask her if she was feeling better. At once he said, Did you get a chance to finish the Denker case? We were just getting hot when you had to go. Yes, I finished it. That Bessie Denker was really something, wasn't she? Yes, she was. He talked on and on, but he paused for a moment concentration. He asked her questions really quickly, more bluntly than she planned. He said it wasn't a point he particularly considered, but after all, he didn't see why not. The thing that made these people what they were wasn't a positive quality, but a negative one. It was the lack of something in them from the beginning, not something they acquired. Now, colorblindness and baldness and hemophilia were all caused by a lack of something or another. No one denied that they were transmitted. Feeble-mindedness was a lack of something too, and certainly is passed on from generation to generation. She had asked him for reassurance, but she had not received it, and she said in a small, desperate voice, But what do psychiatrists think? Reginald laughed at her simplicity. To answer her question, he said, but first ask a few questions of his own. What did psychiatrists think? And what year did he think it was in? He recently read the testimony in the old Thaw case, and might interest her to one of the 6 psychiatrists among the most learned of their day, tested to one thing for their prosecution, while 6 others, equally distinguished in the psychiatric field, testified in the opposite for defense. When she hung up, Mrs. Penmark walked about her apartment, feeling as though she would surely collapse, and it seemed to her that the essential and terrifying pattern of her life was now plain. But this thought was too dreadful for her to face at once. And sitting at her window, watching the trees bending under the force of wind and rain, she said in a thin, frightened voice, Oh, please, oh, please. Then, overwhelmed with guilt so powerful that it was not bearable, She walked about the room in a nervous panic, her hands damp pressed together, as though imploring some remote, implacable power to give her peace once more, to deny the truth she could herself no longer deny. So she wrote to her husband another one of her long passionate letters. In a way, she married him under false pretense, she said. She told him who her mother was and how she made the discovery. Richard Bravo had been closely associated with the Denver case. It wasn't difficult to understand now how he and his wife had come to know her, the one who had survived, and later taken for her own. But she kept wondering why they had done it. Perhaps they hoped to rescue me, for they were both kind and gentle people. The kind to save me from the things they knew about even at that age. They nearly succeeded, but not quite. She wrote, I've been thinking, since I've discovered the truth about myself, I've been thinking since I've discovered the truth about myself, my mother's objection to our marriage. She was right to be suspicious of me. All the reasons she gave for her suspicions were wrong. She must have known by instinct there was something dreadfully wrong with me, that I would bring you only ruin and despair, and that's what I bring you, my darling. I see it now with such a frightening clarity. But if your mother was instinctively right in opposing your marriage to me, I was instinctively right in telling you you knew nothing of the things I found about Rhoda since you were away. I wonder now if I can ever bring myself to tell you those things. I do not think so. You see how shameful that would be for me, don't you? How humiliating. I must think things clearly as I can, and I must I wonder now if I can. You see how humiliating. I must think clearly as I can, and I must live my life with Rhoda with some sort of courage I do not possess in the moment. I must do the best I can. I feel more now strongly than ever that Rhoda is not the joint one I considered. The problem is mine, and I must solve it alone. I alone am responsible. It was I who carried the bad seed that made her who she was, not you. When you return to know these things, I must tell you sometime, accept their implications as I had already done. I think you should abandon Rhoda and me. You are still young, and you must marry again and have children you are entitled to. Children will be healthy and average without this hateful taint that is in my daughter and me. Before she finished her letter, the summer storm had passed, and the hot July sun was shining again. Its beat against the dripping camphor trees, their wet leaves reflecting the light in a brilliance so binding that the unshaded eye could not endure it. She lowered the blinds and tilted the slats, hearing the last of the rain swishing down the Dream Heights sign the gutters. It was Saturday, and she presently saw Emery parked under the wet, reflecting trees and coming the walk, following the sister Monica. They saw Christine behind the window and waved their usual genial manner. When passed out of sight, Monica said gravely, I don't know what's come over Christine lately. I'm concerned about her, and I might as well confess it. Christine was always so careful about her person. I don't think she had her hair or nails done in a month. She began to look so gaunt and seedy. She's not eating properly, I know. She says she is, but I'm convinced she's not. Look, said Emery in an amiable voice. Look, Monica, why don't you quit prying into Christine's personal affairs? Why don't you mind your own business for a change? That afternoon, Mrs. Penmark bundled up the cases Reginald had lent her and returned them to him. She had not meant to go in. She planned to leave him at the door when his houseboy answered the bell. But Reginald saw her and came to welcome her. He insisted that she come in and have a cocktail with him, but she said she'd rather have tea, and the houseboy went to fix it. Reginald asked how she was getting along with her novel. Had she finished her characters in detail? Did she have her plot pretty well in hand? Christine said the book will be a child who repeats a criminal pattern of her grandmother's career. And Reginald said, that explains it. I wondered why this morning why you were interested in the heredity versus environment thing. Yes, she said, yes. How about the child's mother? Is she tarred with the same brush as the same goes? No, I don't think so. I see the mother as an ordinary woman, not too much sense, that sort you meet everywhere. She's helpless and pretty vulnerable. She's a rather dull, stodgy woman, I'm afraid. It would be nice for contrast, he said. He sipped his cocktail and said, tell me this, is the stodgy mother sure about her child, or does she only suspect? I mean, has she anything to go on where her child is concerned? She has something to go on. She has a great deal to go on. Does the conventional mother know about the criminal grandmother? She didn't at first, but she finds out. Explains so many things about her own daughter. Reginald nodded and said after a moment, it sounds all right, but remember one thing. Try to keep the tensions high. Then as she got up to go, he added, the old biddies at Monica's party were interested in your abrupt departure, and if you want to know their verdict, they think you're all expecting. The idea sent Mrs. Penmark into wild, hysterical laughter. She laughed so long that Reginald became a little alarmed and handed her a cocktail and said, drink this down, Christine. You need a drink after all. When Mrs. Penmark was at her home once more, Rhoda practiced her piano for an hour. And toward nightfall, she sat under the lamp, memorizing her Sunday school lesson for the next day. When she was letter perfect, she asked her mother to question her, and Christine did so, thinking, Rhoda has some strange affinity for the cruelties of the Old Testament. There's something as terrible and primitive about her as there is about them. The child got out the butterfly star car she rode on a new prize and showed it to her mother. She said, I'm sure to have a perfect lesson tomorrow. Then make 4 cards, and all I need is 8 more. It won't be long before I get another prize. I hope it's not another book. Mrs. Penmark was ill the next day. She felt faint and dizzy, and after she sent her child to Sunday school, she rested her head in her cupped palm, caught up in such a feeling of unreality that for a time she felt she'd never get up again. But Mrs. Breedlove came down later for her usual Sunday morning visit, and hearing her voice in a hall as she chatted with Mrs. Forsythe, Christine went to the door, determined to ignore her fears. Monica, still concerned about a friend, entered with a resolute cheerfulness. She had rehearsed one of her anecdotes on her way down the stairs, and seating herself solidly, she began talking about a woman she knew, about a woman whose tackiness was a source of laughter among her friends. She said, poor Consuela came to my buffet for supper, and I particularly wanted you to meet her. But she didn't show up until later, after you'd gone, as a matter of fact. Christine nodded and smiled as best she could, and Mrs. Breedlove went on. Everybody's pitied Consuela for a lack of style. Martha David mentioned it this morning when she called it to discuss party with me, but I said, oh no, indeed. Consuela is nobody's victim, believe me. There's something in Consuela that makes her want to wear what she does. It isn't ignorance, and everyone knows it isn't the lack of money to buy the right things with. It isn't that she takes the shopkeeper's fob off her, as you suggested. Oh no. Never, my dear. It's all part of a very fine, well-defined design. Mrs. Penmark looked about her desperation, suddenly sick of her friend's unending aggressive cheerfulness. She stirred in her chair and then looked at her hands. Mrs. Breedlove said, if Consuela bought the first things shopkeepers tossed at her, the effects would be quite different. I said, now in the first place, no stores carry that sort of stuff these days. Not even those cheap little stores down by the wharves. Not even the mail-order houses carry high-buttoned shoes, color veils, and those 5-gored skirts. To find them at all, you must search at them with ardor. And you may depend on that. Consuela has dedicated her life to searching for her wardrobe oddities with the same passion as a dyer rings in his shirt for the flawless pearl. Christine got up suddenly, as though she might faint, and lay down in the living room couch. Monica sat beside her, greatly concerned. I'm not going to argue at this point with you, Christine, she said. I'm going to call my doctor and have him take a look at you. If you're sick, and it's plain you're sick, something must be done. She was already dialing as she talked, and the doctor said he'd come at once. And so he did so, and Mrs. Breedlove met at the foyer for one of the whispered preliminary conversations that doctors endure. He found nothing physically wrong with Mrs. Penmark. He advised her not to worry so much. He told her to eat more than she'd be eating, even if she had forced herself to do it. He left a prescription for sleeping tablets for her insomnia. When she'd gone, Christine resolutely got out of bed, determined to think no more of the things that troubled her. In the days that followed, she managed as best she could in a routine so strict, so filled with trivial activities, she had no time to brood over her problems. She developed an abnormal tenderness for her childhood. She followed her everywhere with her eyes, placating her, apologizing to her, serving her in humility as though imploring forgiveness for the inheritance she'd given her. They shared a bond of horror that bounded them together. They tied them to a common past, a community of guilt that could never be changed through thought or word. They were fixed together by the life of Bessie Danker. There was no going behind that fact. There was no escape for either of them. Sometimes when they were together in the apartment, as though Mrs. Penmark had worked out some wishful illusion that could never be true in reality, and knew, but denying the fact, she could put her arms around the little girl and draw her in a gesture of expiation, as though love itself were strong enough to change the child into a creature she deserved to be. The simple, affectionate child who loved her too. And as her sick affection increased, she would descend on her without warning, to passionately kiss her forehead or cheek, to embrace her with longing. At such times, Rhoda would endure the caress in astonished silence, smooth down her bangs, straighten her frock, and back away. She avoided her mother as best she could. She read, she practiced her piano, she studied her Sunday school text, she pursued her lessons in needlecraft, she sat idly under the pomegranate tree and thought her particular thoughts. Once in desperation, Mrs. Penmark said to the retreating child, "Don't you love me at all? Don't you have any affection for anyone? Are you entirely cold?" And Rhoda, moving implacably toward the door, not knowing what to expect, for laughed charmingly, tilted her neck in the gesture she knew older people found irresistible, and said, "You're silly. I think you're silly." As the date of her departure came near, Mrs. Breedlove wondered if she had been justified in going at all. In leaving dear Christine, who was oddly upset and not at all well, alone, she sought to solve the problem through having Christine and Rhoda come with her to the inn. She was sure, under her influence, she could arrange reservations even at this late day. Christine refused. She begged her friend not to worry about her. She'd be perfectly all right. If anything did happen, she'd call Monica at once. "Oh, very well, if you insist on being stubborn," said Monica in her exasperated voice. Then more softly she said, "But at least you can call me if you need me." "That I insist on. You know where I'll be. It isn't far." She was leaving the next day, and Christine helped her with her preparations. When everything was ready, Monica parked her car in the driveway, and when she and Christine returned to the apartment to see that the gas was off, there were no dripping taps, and that the windows were secured. From her back balcony, she called Leroy, telling him to bring back down and steal them in the trunk of her car. He did so, and Rhoda followed him to the back steps. They were in the courtyard. He winked to the child and said in a voice so soft that women could not hear him, "You better ask Mrs. Brecklow to look out for that little bloody stick while she's at the bay. I done told her you over and over, you better find that stick before I do, but you won't find stock in what I say. There's not any stick to find." Leroy laughed, held his head to one side, and said in a sly, intensive courtship, "Zzz, zzz, zzz. You know what that noise means, Miss Rhoda Penmark? You're a silly man, that's all I know. That's the way mean little children sound when they're fighting up in the little blue electric chair. You said it was a pink chair before. They got 2 chairs. You know what I mean by this time if you didn't talk so much and not listen to what other folks try to tell you. They got a blue little chair for little for mean little boys and a pink chair for mean little girls. He put his hands on his hips, swayed maliciously from side to side. You know what that means to you? I used to think you was smart, but I don't say so anymore. Now I think you're real dumb. The two women came up from the steps, and as the car pulled away from the curb, as Christine pulled up the chair toward the front of the house, Leroy laughed silently, put his forefinger up to his nose, and said, "Zzz. You know what that means as well as I do. You know all right, but if you don't know right now, you'll find out soon enough." Mrs. Penmark, without turning her head, called her daughter, and Rhoda joined her at the walk. Leroy stood watching them as they walked away. The corn-fed Christine wasn't looking so well these days, he thought. She sure got thin and tired looking. Her skin was sort of stretched out like pale too, and then there were circles under her eyes. That one looked 10 years older than she did a month ago. He wondered what the cause was. That trough-fed Christine must be suffering what they used to call battle fatigue in the last war. Now that one wasn't suffering from no battle fatigue. The one was suffering from bed fatigue. The cleverness of his thoughts was so overpowered him that he sat on the back step and laughed silently, glancing from side to side. Somebody was putting it into her all right. Somebody must be climbing up that back porch when everyone was asleep and got her plenty of it. And Christine just stood there in a nightgown, even if she wore that to let him in. He wondered what it could be. It couldn't be Mr. Emery Regis. He was too old. He couldn't climb a porch anyway. It couldn't be that little Reggie Tasker who wrote them crime pieces. That one would jump out of the window if a woman made a pass at him. He thought a long time trying to figure it out, but all he could see was a vague figure without a name, somebody who looked remarkably like himself. That one's not suffering from battle fatigue, he repeated. That one's someone from bed fatigue. He laughed again, his head bobbing up and down in approval of his own wit and discernment. That's the end of that chapter. See you later.